At the age of 6, you're thrust into the forge. Your hands blister, the air burns your throat, and your father's only instruction, hit it harder. This is your life now. An endless grind of smelting and shaping, soot clinging to your skin and soul. But there's something odd here. Why does the pain begin to feel like purpose? You didn't ask for this life, but you learned to survive it. Imagine being 6 years old, standing in the shadow of a roaring forge. Most kids your age are kicking a ball or climbing a tree, but your playground is a world of molten orange metal, glowing like the setting sun, surrounded by sharp tools that could slice skin as easily as they shape iron. It doesn't matter that your hands are still small and unsteady, or that the workload seems impossible for a body as young as yours. You're an apprentice now, and your life belongs to the forge. In the medieval world, starting young wasn't just common, it was expected. Families didn't have the luxury of letting childhood linger. By 6, maybe 7 years old, if you were lucky, you'd already begun learning how to work. For blacksmith apprentices, this meant stepping into a blistering hot workshop and doing whatever grunt work needed to be done. The job list was endless and exhausting. Stoking the fires, carrying water for cooling metal, sweeping up soot, carefully cleaning tools that weighed more than you on a bad day. No one turned around to check if you were tired. Being tired wasn't an excuse. And let's be honest, this wasn't one of those trade your chores for an allowance situations we modern folks might understand. Apprentices didn't get a penny for their effort. What they received instead was permission to exist within the shop. Food was rare, sleep was minimal, and every young worker learned quickly. Obedience wasn't optional. You did exactly what you were told when you were told, whether it made sense or not, because the alternative could be far more painful than the blister from a scorched coal shovel. Now think about what it's like to be a child in that space. You aren't just physically outmatched. The dangers lurking in every corner are more than most 6-year-olds could even comprehend. Metal shards scatter across the workshop floor, heated iron dangerously close to bare arms, stray embers leaping out from the fire pit. One wrong move, one small stumble, and suddenly it's not just a bad moment, it's a permanent scar. Yet somehow, kids adapted because they had no other choice. The forge wasn't just where they worked, it became something they had to survive. For many, the days blurred into each other. The innocent joy of being a kid faded fast. There weren't toys or breaks to run outside and play. Instead, your world revolved around long hours under a scorching fire pit, scraping tiny metal splinters out of your hands as casually as someone else might brush off dirt. Your body started adjusting before your mind even caught up. Movement became automatic, everything driven by muscle memory that developed through endless repetition. Sure, you might occasionally daydream of running away to find something easier, maybe even something fun. But in the back of your mind, you knew there was no escape. It wasn't just your work, it was your future. And yet, for all the hardship, the forge wasn't simply a punishment for the young apprentices who toiled within it. In some grim, unspoken way, it also became their teacher. You learned discipline not by lectures, but by action. There wasn't room for error with the hammer or the tongs when you were working alongside men whose livelihoods depended on your contribution. You didn't need motivational speeches to understand the stakes, when even the smallest mistake could literally cost someone a finger. Slowly, painfully, you began to grasp the rhythm of the work, the demands of the craft, and the pride, however fleeting, of starting to master something. Families, of course, played a huge role in this grueling tradition. For most boys shoved into their apprentice roles, the forge wasn't some random career path. It was their father's world, their grandfather's world, stretching back through generations. Sons didn't do this work because they were passionate about iron. They did it because survival demanded it. Someone had to keep the trade alive, and fathers expected their sons to shoulder the burden without complaint or hesitation. Because let's face it, without a smith in the family, there would be no tools for the farm, no horseshoes for the plough team, and no nails for the roof over your head. Blacksmithing wasn't just a job. Blacksmithing kept your family from starving. Of course, when your father was also the master you served under, the relationship became something much more complicated. He wasn't the gentleman who held your hand through tough times. He was the boss who grunted orders your way, often without explanation, and expected you to figure it out. Break a tool. He's not comforting you about the mistake. He's piling extra work onto your shoulders as punishment. And when he isn't issuing commands, he's standing silently by, scrutinizing every hammer swing and every piece of scrap that fails to take the shape it's supposed to. Even silence felt suffocating under that kind of scrutiny. You see, for medieval apprentices, the concept of childhood didn't really exist in the same way it does now. This phase of life was stripped bare of anything resembling tenderness or exploration. The forge wasn't just a workplace. Over time, it turned into a prison, albeit one your family depended on to stay alive. Each scorching day was a reminder that your childhood hadn't been taken from you accidentally. It was sacrificed deliberately. Play wasn't an option, but the alternative, poverty and starvation, was much worse. And yet, through all this hardship, something began to happen around the edges of the pain. Early exposure to this world didn't just break young apprentices, it shaped them. Their endurance grew stronger, their hands steadier, their instincts sharper. Even as their bodies bore the marks of countless small injuries, they learned not to complain. Not because someone told them they couldn't, but because the rhythm of their life simply left no room for it. In that sweltering womb of heat and labor, children were sculpted into workers with the same grim determination they used to shape iron. But let's not romanticize this. It wasn't inspirational. It wasn't beautiful. It was cruel, plain and simple. Yet it worked. By the time you'd been at the forge for half a decade, you started to understand that it was both a curse you'd never asked for and a necessity you couldn't avoid. It became part of your identity. The soot embedded into your skin, and the calluses hardening your hands weren't just signs of your labor. They were badges of survival. This mixture of burden and purpose is why children clung to their role in the forge, even when they wanted to escape it. They were bound to the craft, whether they liked it or not. It was this early, relentless immersion into the grind of blacksmithing that turned naive little kids into resilient, no-nonsense workers by their early teens. And while they weren't given the luxury of dreaming beyond the shop walls, they did inherit one thing, a skill set that made them indispensable. Still, it all began with one figure looming in the background, the father. As an apprentice, you could never truly separate your father from the man who ruled the forge. He wasn't just teaching you how to hold a hammer or shape a nail. He was the authority demanding you rise to the same level of precision and skill as the generations before you. He wasn't just shaping iron, he was shaping you. And that's where the story really starts to shift. Because life inside the forge wasn't just about technique or a strong back. It was also about learning to see the world in the same way your father did, as a place full of problems that only you could fix, even if no one thanked you for fixing them. Why? Because to him, that's just the way life always was. Your father doesn't waste time on explanations. There's no sit-down talk where he outlines techniques or tools. There's no, today we'll learn about the proper swing of a hammer, or this is how to gauge the heat of the metal. Instead, you get one-word commands, grunts, a nod in one direction or the other, and every so often, the phrase you'll hear 100 times before your first piece of iron ever comes out right. Hit it harder. If you ask a question, there's a good chance the only answer you get is the smack of a horseshoe hitting the wall beside you, followed by an entire week of silence. This is what learning looks like in the forge. It's a system of instruction that refuses to coddle or clarify. And here's the thing, it works, even if it leaves you questioning whether survival is one of the lessons. Your father isn't just your teacher after all. He's the master of the forge, a title that means he not only controls the fires, but also the rhythm of your entire life within it. Any gap in your skill, or your stamina for that matter, reflects back on him, which means his expectations are as hot as the coals you're tending. Expectations start early. Before you even pick up a hammer, you're given the kind of work that no one else wants to do, which, unfortunately, is most of the labor in the shop. The fires don't stoke themselves, so that's on you. The tools don't clean themselves either, even though you'd swear you're cleaning a set that isn't ever clean to begin with. Steel shavings scatter across the floor, smoke fills the air, and the constant clang of work means your ears are still ringing long past nightfall. If it's hot outside, you'll sweat through your clothes before the second hour. If it's cold, you'll still sweat, because the forge doesn't care about the weather. Heat from the fire doesn't stop, just like the work itself. The schedule here isn't exactly forgiving. Forget birthdays, forget Sundays, forget anything resembling a holiday, unless it comes with a feast the whole village is attending. The forge doesn't take a day off, and neither do you. Your father makes sure of that. He keeps his own hours harsh because he sees no glory in slacking. If he ever had an easier apprentice day, he sure doesn't talk about it. Instead, the rules you follow are unwritten but understood. If iron needs shaping, you shape it. If there's dirt in the shop, someone better sweep it. And if your arm is tired, you swing harder until it isn't. Here's a fact that rarely gets acknowledged. The lessons in the forge aren't actually about making iron tools. Not at first. They're about building a tolerance to pain, physical and emotional, because this work hurts. The burns are immediate, whether it's a stray ember that lands on your wrist or a glancing mistake that puts your hand too close to the metal. Your fingertips harden before your knuckles. Everything becomes stiff, dry and cracked, and no amount of attention to the wounds ever feels like they heal fast enough. Whatever doesn't scar is left calloused, and if that happens to your body, imagine what it's doing to your mind. And yet, none of this is seen as cruelty. That's not how your father looks at it. To him, this was simply how blacksmiths are made. He learned the same way from his father, who learned it from his father before that. For generations it was the same. Boys flinched through the same burns, heard the same grunts, and knew the weight of the same hammers. Your father's not interested in telling stories about his own bruises or his early mistakes. Instead, he lets the process do its work, knowing you'll figure it out the same way he did, the hard way. This learn by endurance approach bleeds into every corner of the apprenticeship. There are no shortcuts, no cheat sheets, no diagrams pinned to the walls. It's all repetition and observation. That's it. You watch him hammer. You mirror the motion. You miss the mark. He sighs. And then you try again. If you're smart, you stop overthinking, because overthinking slows you down and slow hands don't survive here. Your best tool isn't knowledge, it's instinct, sharpened by failing in the right way enough times to understand where you went wrong. It might sound harsh, but let's put this into perspective. The forge isn't some quaint workshop scene where father and son bond over a glowing piece of steel. It's a war zone you're thrown into as a 6-year-old foot soldier. The fire billows up before dawn. Work starts before first light. By the time most villagers are rolling out of bed, you've already broken a sweat. The heat presses in so hard it almost feels alive. And the bite of soot and metal dust in your throat is so constant it becomes your normal. Your daily grind involves endless hours of mindless, back-breaking practice. Making nails by hand. You'll do that more times than you can count in those first few years. Thousands of nails. You start with one, hammer striking metal in a tedious back and forth, only to inspect your work and realize it's thin, weak, useless. Toss it to the ground, pick up your tools, and start again. Eventually, after what feels like forever, you'll get it right. Then you make another, and another, and another. The tools in the forge aren't just heavy. They become an extension of your arm, or at least they're supposed to. It's not enough to hold the tongs. You have to feel the irons glow through them. It's not enough to pick up a hammer. You have to swing it with precision so sharp you don't even have to think about where it's going to land. You're not paid in coin for this skill. In fact, the only reward you get is silence. Your father's silence, when for once, he doesn't sigh or shake his head when inspecting your latest attempt. But that silence, that's all the validation you can hope for, at least for now. The forge wasn't built on compliments. Your father expects you to know when you've done well, as though his slightest nod should carry the weight of a trophy. Once you've learned to bleed without flinching, to sweat without complaint, and to hammer without hesitation, he assumes his job is working. And in a twisted sense, he's not wrong. The lessons he's teaching aren't about forging tools. They're about forging resilience. The fire teaches you to endure heat. The work teaches you to endure failure. Every sore muscle, every splinter from the wooden-handled tools, every new ache carving its way across your shoulders, those aren't weaknesses to him. They're proof you're being shaped into the worker you're supposed to become. For you, the hardest part isn't always the labor itself. It's the silence. Questions don't lead to answers here, just commands or frustration from the man you used to picture as your protector. But over time, you start to hear a different kind of lesson hidden in that wordless abyss. You stop expecting comfort or hand-holding. You stop asking why something's done a certain way. Gradually, you realize that in this shop, the fire and the tools teach you as much as your father's hard stare ever could. That's not to say he doesn't care. It's just that in his mind, this is what caring looks like. When he barks an order or grumbles about your slack hand, he's not trying to be cruel. He's ensuring the trade survives. The pain you're enduring now, the countless sleepless hours of hammering and hauling, is just part of making sure the next generation knows what they're doing. It's not personal, it's tradition. And as harsh as it feels, the lessons work. You've already noticed the way your muscles burn less than they used to, or how your hands no longer shake when you're handling molten metal. Sure, the smudges of soot never quite leave your skin, no matter how hard you scrub. But even that feels like a badge of progress. By the time you complete those first years in the forge, your tolerance for pain has grown alongside your skill. The forge, with all its relentless heat and noise, has started to feel almost like a second heartbeat. Constant, rough, but somehow vital. What you don't realize yet is how much it's reshaping you. not just physically, but on a deeper, more instinctive level. The fire burns away everything else, leaving only the beginnings of a blacksmith in its place. By your teens, you've forgotten what silence sounds like. The forge has taken over everything. The air you breathe, the way your muscles move, even the rhythm of your thoughts. It doesn't just feel like a workplace anymore. It feels alive, like a creature you're trapped with. Some days it's manageable, a heavy, smouldering presence, sitting just close enough to make its demands clear. On other days, it becomes something else, a hot, smoky, temperamental beast that expects constant feeding, bending you to its will whether you want to or not. And really, you don't have much of a choice. The forge doesn't negotiate. It never has. There's no escaping the sounds, the hiss of white-hot iron meeting water, the sharp, almost musical clang of hammer against anvil reverberating through your skull, the crackle of flames licking at dry coals, and the creak of wheezing bellows forcing life into the fire. This is the soundtrack of your days, your nights, everything in between. On the rare occasions when the forge goes quiet, maybe you're too tired to keep working, or you've managed to collapse into bed. The silence feels wrong, like something's missing. The absence makes your muscles twitch, like you're losing track of a routine that's been drilled into you so thoroughly it's practically part of your body. The forge, in its own twisted way, has become home. Quiet feels more unsettling than the noise ever could. The heat is ever present, unavoidable, and you've stopped expecting relief from it. It presses into you like gravity, so constant that your body adapts without even meaning to. The soles of your feet instinctively avoid certain patches of scorched ground where the stones burn hotter. The skin at the back of your neck always tingles when flames leap too high, and sweat doesn't feel like sweat anymore. It feels like smoke trying to escape. By now, you don't even flinch when a stray ember lands on your arm. It stings, sure, but you barely notice. That's just part of it. Everything smells permanent. Scorched wool from your tunic, hot leather from your apron, old grease and iron, and something darker. Something the craftspeople jokingly call desperation. It clings to you long after the forge cools at night, if it ever really does. Every inch of you shows the toll the forge has taken. Your hands don't look anything close to how they did when you were a child. Back then, they were soft, clean, maybe a little scraped from climbing trees or rough housing. Not anymore. Now they're inhuman. Your fingers are cracked and blistered, every knuckle tougher than it was the year before. Soot has worked its way so deep under your skin that it feels like part of you now, no matter how much you scrub. Your nails don't grow back the same way once they've been torn off by bad grips or smashed under dropped tools. More than once, you've looked down and realized your blood has mixed with hot metal, boiling on the edge of a workpiece, and all you do is wrap it up with whatever cloth is closest and keep going. Even your body doesn't move the way it used to. The long hours, the repetitive motions, and the constant strain reshape you as much as the hammer reshapes iron. Your arms grow thick and muscular, not in the heroic way that ballads describe knights or warriors, but in the practical, uneven way of someone who lifts and swings and works without rest. Your back is starting to hunch from years of leaning over the anvil, and your knees creak every time you crouch to pick something up. Sometimes, when you catch your reflection in a trough of water or polished metal, you barely recognize the person staring back. You look older than your years, worn down by the demands of a job that doesn't care how young you are. There's no avoiding the isolation either. You're needed, essential for the village to function. but the work itself keeps you separate. While others might gather in the tavern or spend time in the market, you're stuck at your anvil, hammering horseshoes for the farmer down the road, who can't finish ploughing until his team is reshod. While the carpenter works in a breezy, sunlit workshop, you're turning the bellows over and over until your arms turn to jelly, just to heat the forge enough to fix a bent nail or sharpen rusted tools. You don't dislike these people, but understanding their lives feels impossible when yours is stuck in this endless loop of fire and steel, and the work never ends. There's no such thing as being done in the forge. Every day brings another tool to make, another plough to fix, another hinge or hook or blade to finish. It's this relentless repetition that drives your craft forward, though. The mistakes you made as a child don't happen now. There's no time for them. Nails that used to take you hours to shape come together in minutes. You swing the hammer and hit your mark without looking. The heat of the iron tells you everything you need before it changes color. The forge is no longer just a place you work. It's the rhythm your life follows, the reason you wake up every morning before the sun has even stretched above the hills. But with that mastery comes a price. By now, you've stopped thinking of the forge as a job you might someday outgrow. There's no outgrowing this. The heat, the sound, the soot, they aren't just part of your routine. They become part of you. Your nose still picks up hints of scorched iron in the air long after you've stepped outside. Your ears, so used to the clang of hammer against anvil, strain for it when it's gone. Your muscles ache in a way that feels more permanent than temporary. You realize there's no escaping it. The forge has claimed you, body and soul. It sounds grim, and it is, but there's a strange comfort in knowing you've reached this point. This isn't the kind of job you can do halfway. The forge demands everything, and by your teens, it's already taken most of what you have to give. In return, it leaves you with something more than just blackened hands and a creaky back. It gives you skill, precision, even pride. The tools and weapons and structures you help create start to feel like an extension of yourself. With every horseshoe that fits perfectly, every blade you sharpen to a razor's edge, there's this quiet satisfaction that's hard to explain, even to yourself. It's the kind of pride that doesn't need a reward or applause. It just is. But that pride comes in whispers, not shouts. And it never quite drowns out the weight of what the forge costs you. You don't have the luxury of complaining. The forge isn't interested in your feelings. It's just fire, steel, and routine, grinding away at you like the whetstone grinding down the edge of a blade. Still, deep down, you understand that this cycle, this grueling, thankless process, is the only way the craft survives. The forge shapes iron, yes, but more than anything, it's been shaping you all along. And just when it feels unbearable, there's a moment. It's subtle, easy to miss if you aren't watching for it, but it's there every time a project comes together. In that split second when the metal cools into its final form, when all your effort turns into something finished and functional, there's a spark. Not on the iron, but somewhere in your chest. It's fleeting, gone quicker than you'd like, but something about it makes the burns, the scars, and the exhaustion feel almost worth it. Almost. After days of hammering and shaping, the metal cools in the water with a sharp hiss. You lift the horseshoe from the bucket and hold it up to the light, scrutinizing every curve and edge. It's not perfect. Nothing ever really is in this craft, but this one fits, finally. For just a moment, a flicker of pride breaks through the backache, the burns on your hands, and the soot plastered to your skin. The shoe sits just as it should, a simple success in a life overcrowded with failure. It's not much, but it's enough to remind you why you keep coming back to this punishing forge day after day. This is what makes blacksmithing so different from other trades. The forge, for all its brutality, gives you something tangible to show for it. You can spend hours, even weeks, on a single piece, failing over and over until the iron bends the way you want it to. It's frustrating, soul-crushing even, when you ruin another nail or the blade warps at the last second during heat treating. But when the fire and hammer finally do as you intend, when the tool is whole, sharp, useful, there's a satisfaction there that no amount of soot or sweat can dim. It's not the kind of pride that needs applause or recognition. It's quieter than that, as if the work itself nods in approval. Blacksmiths, as a rule, never had the luxury of viewing their craft as just a job. Every piece they created had a purpose, a role to fill in the constant balancing act of survival in a medieval village. The tools they forged ploughed fields, built homes, repaired carts, and kept livestock moving. Nothing in their forge was made just for the sake of it. But knowing this also worked against them. There was always another thing to build, another order to complete, another broken piece to fix. The satisfaction of creation flickered only briefly before being replaced by the relentless reality of more work. Take something as basic as a ploughshare. The farmer waiting on it doesn't see the hours you've spent at the anvil, pouring everything into shaping a sturdy, even edge. They don't see the missteps that turned one bar of iron into a misshapen heap on the floor, or the frustrations when the fire didn't burn quite hot enough to weld the seams. What they see is the final product, a working tool, and nothing more. But you know the truth. Every strike of your hammer, every decision you made about the heat of the metal, brought this tool to life. It's as much a reflection of your skill as it is a basic necessity for their fields. And in the smallest way, that feels good. Somewhere in the rhythm of the forge, fire, strike, you begin to feel the bond between yourself and the tools you use. Your hammer isn't just a lump of metal at the end of a stick. It's practically an extension of your body. You know the weight of it as well as your own arm. You know the slight nick in its edge where it struck one too many hard pieces of scrap. And yes, there are days when it swings just a little too far to the side and throws your whole arm out of alignment, leaving you muttering a string of curses under your breath about replacing the damn thing. But it stays in your hand because it's yours, and you trust it in a way that can only come from so many hours of shared work. Tongs, chisels, bellows, they're more than the tools of the trade. They're silent partners in your craft, covered in the same soot and scars as your own skin. Tongs are clumsy, awkward things, always too hot where you don't want them to be, and never tight enough to hold the iron just right. They burn you constantly. Your palms, the backs of your knuckles, even the edge of your thumb if you aren't careful. But without them, there's no way to control the searing metal. And as much as you curse their existence, you can't deny their importance. The chisel's no different. It reminds you of its necessity every time it splits metal with one sharp strike, but also of its imperfections when it dulls too quickly or veers off course. It's strange to think of the tools as imperfect, especially when you depend on them so heavily. But they age, just like you. If the forge doesn't break them, it wears them down until their edges are blunt and their surfaces are warped. You find yourself forging replacements, not just because they're needed, but because there's something almost comforting about repeating the cycle of creation. For a blacksmith, the act of creating is as much a craft as it is a necessity. A blade isn't just sharpened steel. It's the memory of 1,000 failures leading up to one perfect edge. A horseshoe isn't just bent iron. It's sweat and soot and hours of back-breaking work made solid in your hands. There's an unspoken understanding, a connection between you and what you've made. Once you're finished, the piece leaves your forge and takes on a life of its own. The farmer's fields, the soldier's weapon, the villager's new hinge. They all start with your hands, even if no one ever says it out loud. But no matter how fulfilling these moments might feel, they never last. The fire doesn't wait for you to admire your work. As soon as one project is complete, the next is already being shoved into your hands. There's always something or someone pulling you back to the anvil. The grind of it all dulls the shine of pride, quickly boiling it down to its most fleeting form. A perfect blade is celebrated for only a moment before your exhausted arm picks up the next piece of iron in the pile. Still, that fleeting spark of pride is enough to keep you going. If you were doing this work for someone else's approval, you would have quit a long time ago, assuming the forge would even let you quit. No, this is something deeper, rooted in the knowledge that you've taken raw, unyielding material and shaped it into something that works, something that matters. You see the proof of your effort when the farmer's plow cuts through the soil, when the knight's sword strikes true, or even when the new hinge creaks a little less than the one it replaced. The people around you may not notice, but the tool's usefulness is thanks enough. In those rare moments when everything comes together just right, the forge doesn't feel like it owns you. It feels like it's finally giving something back. It's an invisible kind of reward. No applause, no praise, just the quiet satisfaction that you've done your part to hold the world together for a little while longer. The grind will never stop, but every nail, every blade, every horseshoe is proof that you're more than just the body at the anvil. You're a creator, even if no one thinks to say thank you. But of course, this kind of fulfillment comes with its price. The burns, the soot, the endless ache in your spine. These are the costs the forge demands in return for these brief moments of pride. And you don't realize it yet, but it's not just your tools in your hands that are wearing down. Your lungs are taking in the forge's hidden dangers with every breath. Each hiss of the fire sends something into the air that you're too busy working to notice. And soon enough, the cost of creation starts to hit much closer to home. Your lungs ache, the air feels heavy, and clean air isn't just a luxury. It's starting to feel imaginary. In the forge, every breath brings something with it: smoke, ash, and a mix of metallic tangs you've become too familiar with. The cough that rattles in your chest isn't new. It's been showing up more often, starting as a small irritation you could brush aside. But now, every inhale feels like pulling air through thick wool. If someone had told you this is what breathing in a forge would cost, you probably wouldn't have believed them. Then again, you didn't really have a choice to say no. The air itself feels alive, but not in a good way. It swirls and presses around you, heavy with smoke that lingers no matter how wide the doors are pulled open. On some days, a rare gust of wind hits just right, clearing a path through the choking haze for a moment. That quick glimpse of sunlight feels like a forgotten world. But most of the time, the forge is its own suffocating ecosystem. Metal dust dances on every surface, invisible until the light hits it just so, revealing the floating specks that seem to coat everything, including your lungs. The fire's smoke mixes with oil fumes when the quenching tank hisses, and the distinct sour tang of burnt leather from ruined gloves catches in your nose longer than you'd like. There's no ventilation to speak of, nothing to filter the air or pull the smoke away. Sure, some forges had chimneys, But even those were more decorative than functional, doing little more than pretending to let some smoke escape. Often, the soot-stained walls of the workshop were the only things that showed where the smoke had gone, to linger and stain and settle, just like it does in your chest. On bad days, the air feels so thick you'd swear it could be cut with one of the knives you're trying to make. Back then, there wasn't much anyone could do about it. Protective gear didn't exist, or at least not in the way we'd imagine it today. The closest thing you might have to protection was a rag tied haphazardly over your face. But here's the problem. It didn't really stop anything. The rag soaked up sweat faster than it blocked out fumes, leaving you gasping and feeling like you just trapped the smoky air even closer to your face. You'd pull it off within an hour, defeated, and go back to breathing the forge's heavy, caustic air directly. At first, you might not even notice the damage it's doing to you. Breathing in the forge feels wrong, but it also starts to feel normal. When the coughing starts, it's just a tickle in your throat, easy to dismiss. A dry hack here and there, no big deal. But over time, that tickle turns into something deeper. You realize you're coughing during most of the day, and when you spit into the corner, the streak of black you see makes you pause for only a second before moving on. Black mucus becomes just another sign of a day's hard work. The same as the soot on your hands or the ache in your shoulders. No one tells you to stop. No one tells you to rest. After all, if the coughing hasn't killed you yet, what's one more day? Over years, though, the forge starts taking more than just your sweat and energy. The tightness in your chest becomes constant. The deep breaths you used to take without thinking now feel like you're dragging soot directly into your lungs. You start waking up in the middle of the night, wheezing, your ribs straining as you try to find a way, any way, for your lungs to expand again. And there's no escaping it. Even if you step outside the forge for a minute, the damage is already there. The forge doesn't just stay in the workshop. It comes home with you, packed into your breath like an unshakable weight. Respiratory issues weren't just common for blacksmiths. They were expected. The forge didn't care how strong or stubborn you were. Every blacksmith, no matter how skilled, faced the same enemy, the air itself. Conditions like black lung, which miners often suffered from as well, weren't exactly known by name back then, but their symptoms were unmistakable. Chronic coughing, difficulty breathing, and a life expectancy that rarely stretched as long as it should have. Some blacksmiths developed asthma long before the word even existed, their lungs permanently scarred from years of soot and smoke. For most, it wasn't a question of if their health would fail. It was a question of when. What made it all worse was how painfully ordinary it was. No one batted an eye when a blacksmith doubled over, coughing up something dark and thick into a rag. A fit of coughing wasn't alarming. It was just part of the background noise, blending in with the clang of hammers and the hiss of water. There was no doctor coming to check on you, no community rushing in with concern. If breathing was hard, you just pushed through it. Stopping wasn't an option, because the forge didn't wait, and neither did the people depending on it. This wasn't just a job. It was your entire life, and the air you were choking on was as much part of the deal as the hammer in your hand. The forge provided food, shelter, and a place in the village, sure, but it also came with a slow, steady price. A creeping sense that every breath was one small step closer to your lungs giving out. And yet, if you wanted to eat, you inhaled the smoke, accepted the black mucus, and carried on. Clean air wasn't even a consideration. It was a fantasy, something you didn't have time to think about while trying to keep up with the endless orders piling up around you. The truth is, blacksmithing didn't just shape iron, it shaped the people who worked the iron, wearing them down as surely as the hammer wore down the anvil. Breathing wasn't just something you did, it was something you fought for. Every inhale pulling in more of the iron particles and smoke that had become part of your existence. You'd never complain, of course. Complaining didn't fix broken plows or sharpen rusted scythes. Complaining certainly didn't build the hinges or blades or horseshoes that held the village together. So you worked, and you breathed, and you let the forge take what it wanted. The forge, as brutal as it was, couldn't be escaped, even as it stripped you down breath by breath. It was a necessary evil, both a livelihood and a quiet killer. You may have wondered, at some point, if it was worth it. If all of this was the cost of survival, perhaps you'd thought about whether there was another way, some other life where you could step outside and take a deep breath without choking. But then your hammer would rise again, the forge's heat pulling you back into its grip, because the blacksmith wasn't allowed the luxury of stopping. The world outside needed you, even if it never stopped to think what that need was doing to the inside of your lungs. The irony, of course, was that despite how much the forge took from you, no one noticed. You coughed and hacked and wheezed your way through life. But as far as the village was concerned, you were just there. Useful, invisible, necessary. They got their nails, their tools, their weapons. They got their farms up and running, their homes repaired, their wagons fixed before the next trip to the market. And you just kept breathing it all in. Every blacksmith bore this burden in silence, their suffering hidden beneath layers of soot and sweat. Eventually, you learned to accept it. The forge owned your body, your breath, and your future. You learned to live with the black-streaked rags, the coughing fits, and the nights where you could feel every inhale scraping through your chest. It became normal, in its own warped way, to choke every day of your life, because choking meant you were still alive, still hammering, still working. But still, there was a quiet, bitter truth that lingered in your mind as you gasped for air between labor. Everyone needed you, yet no one truly saw you. The forge swallowed men whole, giving the village steel in return, while the blacksmiths became as invisible as the smoke they breathed. They shaped the world and held it together, but no one ever noticed the cost. You knew this deep down, and the weight of that knowledge was just as suffocating as the air itself. Everyone needs you, but no one thanks you. That's the reality of being a blacksmith in your village. Day after day, the fire roars and the hammer clangs, and as the hours crawl by, your neighbors come and go with their requests. Tools to mend, plows to sharpen, hinges to fix, or weapons to prepare for uncertain times. They have problems. You provide the solution. Then they walk away, often without more than a nod or a muttered, "Good enough." You watch them leave dirty and tired, while they go on with their lives that depend, whether they acknowledge it or not, on the work you've done. In the medieval village, it's not an exaggeration to say that absolutely everything would fall apart without you. Think about it. Without a decent plowshare, the farmer can't work his fields. Without nails, the carpenter can't build homes or repair wagons. Horseshoes keep carts moving and armies marching, while sickles and scythes bring in the harvest. And that's just the tools. Every bent hinge keeping a door steady, every latch that secures a gate, every blade sharpened to cut clean. It all starts in the forge. You might not be out there in the fields or on the battlefield with them, but your hands are in everything they do. Here's the catch, though. no one really stops to notice. Sure, they know where to go when something breaks or isn't working. They'll show up in your workshop, dump a rusted blade or a broken chain in front of you, explain the problem in as few words as possible, and then, that's it. They don't linger to watch the work or ask how your day has been. To them, this is just your job, like the baker makes bread and the miller grinds flour. Except bread runs out, and flour needs to be resupplied. The shovels, nails, and hooks you create, those last. Long after you've blistered your palm shaping them, they'll be cutting earth, repairing homes, or securing livestock. But no one thinks about that part. It's strange being so needed and so invisible at the same time. The villagers know where you are. It's hard to miss the constant ringing of metal and the occasional plume of smoke rising above your workshop. But they only think of you when they need something fixed. You're the safety net, always there to catch whatever breaks, whether it's a snapped wagon wheel or a dull side that can't cut through grass anymore. When things are working though, when the tools are sharp and the doors are swinging smoothly, your name rarely comes up. The truth is, no one walks around saying, "Thank goodness for the blacksmith." They might thank the farmer for the harvest, or the doctor for tending wounds, but your contributions stay in the background, invisible. It's like they've forgotten that someone had to forge that plow in the first place, or sharpen the blade they're using. Your work is essential, but it's taken for granted because, well, that's just how it's always been. This isn't helped by the way payment works, or doesn't work. Sure, some people pay you in coin, but just as often, payment comes in goods. A basket of eggs here, a sack of grain there. Other times, they can't pay at all, promising to make it up next time, or offering some vague assurance that their gratitude should be enough. You smile, nod, and let them go, because what else can you do? Call it a deal, call it charity. Either way, it's inconsistent, and the forge never runs on goodwill alone. You still need to buy charcoal, replace tools when they break, and of course, you still need to eat. But you make it work. You have to. The work itself is endless. If it breaks, you fix it. If it's dull, you sharpen it. And when someone asks for something new, you create it from scratch. Each strike of the hammer, each flicker of fire a step toward making their tool, their weapon, their solution. Sometimes, the challenges feel almost laughable. A farmer hands you a blade that's so rusted and bent, it looks like it's been abandoned in a field for years. And yet he expects you to shape it into something good as new. And somehow, you do. It takes time and sweat and patience, but eventually, the ruin in your hands becomes useful again. The farmer doesn't see the hours it took or the number of times you had to start over. What he sees is a tool that works, and for him, that's all that matters. You should feel frustrated, angry even, about how little recognition you get for holding up the world this way. But in a strange way, that's not how you see it. Yes, there are days when it feels thankless. When another villager drops off something broken without so much as a greeting, it's hard not to wish for more. A little gratitude maybe. A pause, just long enough to acknowledge the effort it takes to keep their lives moving forward. But deep down, you already know. They may not show it, but they need you. Every time they come to you with something broken, it's proof. The forge is connected to everything they do, whether they realize it or not. And maybe that quiet knowledge is enough. As much as you may want their thanks, you don't work for applause. You work because you know how much chaos one broken hinge, one shattered tool, one dull plow can cause. You've seen it firsthand. The carpenter can't work if his nails aren't strong. The farmer suffers if his tools fail mid-harvest. The soldiers defending the village won't stand a chance with dull blades. Your work doesn't just help, it holds the entire village together. One crack, one weak link, and the whole thing could start to unravel. So you forge on, literally. Day after day, you keep the fire burning, the hammer swinging, the tools sharpening. Because you know what the village doesn't say aloud, they couldn't manage without you. They assume the blacksmith's work will always get done because it always has. And in a way, you've accepted that. You pride yourself on the quiet strength it takes to keep everything working, even if no one ever says good job, or even remembers your name once they've left with whatever you've made for them. The forge is its own kind of proof. The glowing heat of the fire and the weight of the hammer remind you that this work matters, even if no one says it. Every tool that leaves your anvil, every blade that finds its edge, every nail that holds two boards together is a testament to your place in the village. They may not say it, but deep down, you know the truth. Without the blacksmith, everything would come to a halt. And as much as they take your work for granted, there's a small, stubborn pride in knowing the village relies on you in ways they don't even realize. It's a strange, invisible legacy. Tools that you've made, scattered across homes and fields, performing their jobs long after you've moved on to the next task. And maybe that's why blacksmithing runs in families. This trade, this essential work, gets passed down, father to son, generation to generation. Not because it's glamorous or because it brings fortune, but because it's vital. The cycle continues because someone has to make sure the forge doesn't grow cold, that the nails and blades and hinges keep coming. You've learned this reality from your father, just as he learned it from his. And now, as you glance toward the corner of the forge, you see the tools you'll pass down one day, the same ones your father passed to you. They're worn but steady, much like yourself. The world outside will keep asking and taking, but you have a quiet certainty. The work you do doesn't just survive, it endures, generation after generation, shaping the future as surely as it shaped the past. Your son picks up the hammer, testing its weight as if it's a foreign object, though you know that won't last long. His grip is clumsy now, but it'll firm up soon enough. The swing will come naturally, the same way it did for you and your father, and every father before him. You feel a quiet pang watching him, knowing what's ahead. The burns, the exhaustion, the coughing that never leaves your chest. But this is what happens when you're born into this trade. As much as you might wish for him to walk a different path, the forge doesn't allow for alternatives. The cycle begins again, as it always has. In medieval villages, blacksmithing wasn't just a profession. It was a legacy, carried within families like a birthright. Sons didn't choose to become blacksmiths. They were chosen by circumstance, born into families where the hammer and fire were as much a part of life as bread and water. From an early age, boys stepped into the gritty rhythm of the forge alongside their fathers. Children as young as 6 would stand by the fire, absorbing its lessons through blistered hands and tired feet, learning not just the craft, but how to endure it. The apprenticeship system formalized this arrangement, but truthfully, it was simpler than that. Fathers taught sons because they had to. The craft and the survival of the family depended on this unbroken chain. Your first lessons at the forge are rough, not just because the work is physically grueling, but because your father doesn't have time for mistakes, or patience for explanations, really. He shows, you mirror, you fail. He grunts, then gestures for you to try again. Questions get you nothing but a long stare. Do it wrong, and you're told to start over, no matter how raw your hands already feel. The blacksmith's trade is taught without words, passed down through observation, repetition, and eventually instinct. This is how it's always been. Somewhere in those years of hard labor, the rhythm of the hammer, the burn of the fire, and the weight of the work settle into your bones until they feel like second nature. And that's how you'll teach your son, whether you want to or not. But knowing this cycle doesn't make it easier to watch. When you look at your son, you see more than just your younger self. You see the scars he hasn't earned yet, the calluses, the burns, the hunched shoulders that will come from hours, days, years working by the anvil. You see the future etched into his hands before he even knows what it is. And there's a strange pride tangled in that inevitability. Because for all the pain it brings, the forge is a skill, one not everyone can master. This trade doesn't just ensure survival, it makes you indispensable. As long as there's a forge to work in, there's a place for him in the world. He might not see that now, but one day he'll understand. Generations of blacksmiths came and went, yet the tools remained the same. When you hand him the tongs, the hammer, the chisel, you're not just giving him objects, you're passing down history. These aren't pristine tools. They carry the marks of years of use, the worn edges and grooves of countless hands that wielded them. Maybe it's the chip on the chisel you made when you mishandled it as an apprentice, or the warping on the pliers your father used. So often they bent under his strength. Holding them doesn't just teach what they can accomplish, it teaches where they came from. And in a way, they're as much his inheritance as anything else you could offer. It's not just the tools he inherits, it's the techniques, the small secrets of the trade that only come from experience. You show him the best way to keep the fire at just the right heat, an art his grandfather passed down to you. You teach him to listen to the sound of the hammer strike, because the iron always has something to say about how it's shaping up. You guide his hand as he begins to feel the difference between a useless lump of metal and something that's worth finishing. These lessons don't happen in a day. They're learned over years, burned into his memory like the soot embedded in his skin. But for every skill and tradition you pass on, there's something else he's bound to inherit too. The sacrifices. The long nights spent in the shop while the rest of the village gathers at the tavern. The growing ache in his shoulders that he'll ignore because the work won't let him stop. The endless coughs that'll start as faint scratches in his throat and deepen into a constant rattle. This is the part you don't talk about because you don't know how to. How do you explain that? Even though the forge will shape him into something stronger, it will also take something from him every day it burns. And yet, knowing all this, the hammer is still placed in his hands, because it has to be. The world outside the forge doesn't care about the weight of his work or the toll it extracts. It cares about the results. The farmer doesn't pause to think about how much effort it took to sharpen his scythe. He just needs it sharp enough to get through his fields before the night comes. Same with the soldier who expects a blade ready for battle, or the villager whose gate hinge has broken one too many times. They don't see the blacksmith, they just see the fix. And without another generation to keep the forge burning, the village itself risks falling apart. The blacksmith trade wasn't built to bring wealth or glory. It wasn't a path to fame or riches. It was a means to survive and to ensure that others survived too. That's the legacy you pass down. Not gold, not land, not titles, but the ability to shape metal into something that matters, to take the raw and unformed and through flames and effort, make it indispensable. It's a harsh but vital skill, a thread that holds entire communities together, even if no one stops to thank you for it. And while this inheritance might be steeped in soot and scars, it's also suffused with pride, because for all its miseries, blacksmithing carries a kind of meaning other trades can't rival. Every tool, every blade, every nail feels like a small victory against the chaos of the world. They're tangible proof of your labor, and they'll outlast you, just like they outlasted your father and his father before him. That's the bittersweet truth of it all. The work never ends, but it also never disappears. So as your son swings the hammer, echoing the motions you've performed for decades, you feel the weight of that legacy. He doesn't know it yet, but the forge is already pulling him into its orbit. It's a constant, unyielding force, as much a part of your family as the people in it. The tools, the rhythm of the hammer, those will be his soon. And one day, far into the future, he'll look at his own son, standing before the fire, tools in hand, and realize the cycle continues. But the legacy of blacksmithing doesn't just stop at survival or skill. Beneath the soot and sweat lies something deeper, transformation. The blacksmith shapes metal, yes, but in the process, the forge shapes the blacksmith. And when you think of it that way, it's not surprising that other worlds share this same fire. The ancient alchemists, the ones who looked at fire not just as a tool, but as a symbol of change, felt the same pull. Because this isn't just about forging iron. It's about how fire and effort can take the raw, the broken, the unformed, and create something entirely new. Blacksmiths shaped iron. But what about the people who believe fire could transform not just metal, but the human soul itself? You've spent the last several sections picturing a forge, a place where raw material bends under heat and hammer. Now imagine stepping into another kind of forge, this one not bound by anvils and tongs, but by philosophy, mystery, and the kind of heat you can't escape with a splash of water. This is the world of alchemy, where transformation wasn't just about creating tools or weapons. It was about turning the ordinary into the extraordinary and, in the process, reimagining the possibilities for yourself and the universe around you. But don't get distracted by fairy tale ideas of turning lead into gold. That's only the shiny tip of something much deeper. Alchemists weren't just chasing wealth for its own sake. They were chasing transformation itself, the kind of change that turned ignorance into wisdom, chaos into order, and yes, sometimes metals into jewels. And in some ways, their obsession with change wasn't so different from what Blacksmith did. Every day. Think about it. Both crafts start with heat, a raw material, and the willingness to endure frustration as you reshape what's in front of you. The difference is where they place their focus. The blacksmith shapes the tangible, their hands blackened from labor. The alchemist reaches for the metaphysical, their minds crowded with symbols, riddles, and something that feels just out of reach. To understand where this all began, you need to step out of medieval Europe and into the fertile black lands of ancient Egypt. And when I say black lands, that's not just poetic. The Egyptians called their country Kem, named for the rich, dark soil left behind by the Nile's floods. This soil was a symbol of potential, raw material waiting to be transformed into life. Sound familiar? This is where the word alchemy originates, rooted in this idea of transformation tied to the natural world. To the Egyptians, the land itself wasn't just fertile. It was sacred. It was the foundation of their way of life. And it wasn't hard to imagine applying this same principle of transformation to other corners of existence, from the metal glinting in the workshops to the souls navigating their way through eternity. If blacksmithing was about reshaping the physical world, Egyptian alchemy took it a step further, seeing every act of creation as a reflection of something divine. The process of forging wasn't just functional, it was spiritual. Fire wasn't just heat, it was the bridge between the raw and the refined, the earthly and the heavenly. Alchemy leaned into this philosophy hard, treating transformation as the language of the gods. And nowhere was this idea more potent than in mummification. Remember, the Egyptians didn't see death as an end. It was another kind of transformation, preparing the body for an eternal journey through the afterlife. Embalming wasn't just about preservation. It was seen as a sacred act of refinement. Oils were blended, herbs were used, and the body itself became a sort of living or unliving symbol of all things alchemical. Much of this philosophy was guided by Thoth, one of the most important figures in Egyptian spirituality. You might recognize him from the images where he's got the head of an ibis, holding a writing tool. Thoth was the god of wisdom, magic, and the moon, believed to have laid down the foundations of science and knowledge itself. For the early alchemists, he wasn't just a background figure. He was the figure, said to hold the secrets to understanding not only how matter could change, but how reality itself could be reshaped. Those secrets were supposedly immortalized in the fabled Emerald Tablet, a small object said to contain the ultimate keys to alchemical transformation. If you stood in front of the tablet, and no, we don't know for sure if it ever really existed, you'd read its most famous line: "That which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above." At first glance, it sounds cryptic, because it is. But think of it as the starting point for every alchemical journey. The tablet's message wasn't just some mystical fortune cookie telling you to live your best life. It laid out the idea that the microcosm, things small and personal, mirrors the macrocosm, the larger workings of the universe. Alchemy was built on this idea. Everything, no matter how chaotic, no matter how raw or untamed, could be transformed into something better. In that sense, understanding and manipulating the tangible world could also reveal the secrets of your own mind, body, or even soul. To the Egyptians and later alchemists across Persia, Greece, and Europe, everything you touched, shaped, and burned in the physical world reflected the inner workings of the universe itself. And this was no abstract idea. The very process of working with metals, taking base elements, breaking them down, and refining them, built an unmistakable parallel with the human spirit. Lead represented something heavy, dull, and plain. Gold, so difficult to achieve, symbolized spiritual enlightenment and perfection. Blacksmiths may not have explicitly been chasing spiritual growth, but even they understood this concept in practice. You start with something raw and unrefined, something that feels stubborn and useless, and through heat, time, and a lot of mistakes, you reshape it into something useful, even beautiful. For alchemists, fire wasn't just a practical tool. It was the heart of change, the force that burned away impurities, leaving only the purest essence behind. Blacksmiths, standing over their relentless forges, might have understood this better than anyone else, whether they realized it or not. Every time they slipped a glowing piece of iron from the fire, its edges softened, ready to be shaped into something purposeful. And every time it cooled and hardened, it carried the marks of what had been done to it. To blacksmiths, this was work. To alchemists, it was a metaphor for existence, for burning away ignorance, flaws, and chaos to become something extraordinary. But where blacksmithing depended on brute force paired with precision, alchemy thrived on symbolism and philosophy layered so thick it almost felt like a language of its own. The four classical elements, fire, water, air, and earth, weren't just poetic descriptions. They were active agents in the alchemical process. Fire was the destroyer and purifier. Water dissolved and cleansed. Air transformed one state into another. Earth grounded and stabilized. These weren't just tools for a laboratory. They reflected the alchemist's inner journey. Egyptian alchemy, in particular, framed this transformation as a sacred duty. To refine metal wasn't just chemistry. It mirrored the gods shaping creation itself. Alchemists saw themselves as co-creators of the world, carrying out miniature versions of divine processes in their experiments. Whether they were blending materials for spiritual rituals or attempting to perfect metals, their craft hinged on the belief that the smallest actions reflected universal truths. The same way a quenched piece of iron found its strength, an alchemist sought to temper the human condition. And while much of Egypt's alchemical wisdom stayed tied to its culture, its ideas found their way across borders and centuries. Persian thinkers like Jabir ibn Hayyan picked up on these Egyptian principles, blending them with Islamic philosophy to create something entirely new. In Europe, alchemy became a fascination of its own, with even medieval monks studying the Emerald Tablet, interpreting its poetry through the lens of Christian mysticism. What started as a way to understand the fertile powers of the Nile had grown into a philosophy that stretched from reforging materials to reimagining the self. The more you reflect on it, the more the link between these two crafts sharpens. Blacksmiths forged weapons and tools to transform their villages. Alchemists worked in search of wisdom to transform society, or even humanity itself. Both dealt with heat, resistance, and failure. Both knew the weight of consistent effort, the frustration of setbacks, and the fleeting satisfaction when things finally came together. One reshaped the tangible present. The other tried to perfect the future. So while the blacksmith hammered out plowshares and horseshoes, the alchemist held their flask over the flame, watching for the moment when something raw became something refined. Both, in their own way, believed in the power of transformation, and both felt the pull of the fire, the thing that destroys, creates, and reshapes everything it touches. One forged civilization, the other tried to unlock the universe. And when you really think about it, they weren't so different after all. Every horseshoe, every blade, every nail, the world you know was built on the backs of blacksmiths. Their work was everywhere, even if their names weren't. Tools, weapons, infrastructure. None of it happened without them. And yet, their role in shaping civilization was both essential and strangely invisible. Like the nails holding together the beams of a house. You don't notice it, but without it, everything collapses. Picture a simple medieval village. It's small. A few dozen homes, a marketplace, a church. There's a mill grinding grain for bread, fields stretching into the distance, and a handful of workshops scattered along the outskirts of town. In the middle of it all, though, there's a blacksmith's forge, with its endless clang of iron on iron and the steady, pale wash of smoke rising into the sky. It's not grand, and it's not the first thing a visitor notices, but every part of that village depends on it. The forge wasn't just a workshop. It was the beating heart of the community's survival. Farmers came for sickles, plows, and scythes, their lifelines during the harvest. Carpenters needed nails and hinges, tools to shape wood into shelters and wagons. Soldiers could hardly march to defend their lands without swords, shields, and armor. Even the smallest items, like pot hooks to hold cooking pots or brackets to secure shelves, needed forging. And all of it started with the blacksmith. Your own work as a blacksmith tied into every corner of life. A farmer walked into your workshop carrying a cracked plowshare, and you knew it wasn't just about fixing a chunk of metal. That broken plough meant fields left unworked, crops unharvested. His family, and maybe half the village, would feel the weight of that failure come winter. Or maybe the problem was a soldier's dull blade. A single nick at its edge might not seem serious, but in the chaos of battle, the difference between a sharp strike and a slipped swing wasn't academic. It was life or death. But here's the thing. No one stopped to think about the blacksmith when those tools and weapons worked exactly as they were supposed to. People noticed the farmer's bounty, the carpenter's sturdy homes, the knight's gleaming sword raised in defense of the village. But they didn't think about the hands that forged the tools behind those successes. Blacksmiths were the background noise of medieval life, as forgettable as the soot smeared across their faces. Most villagers simply saw you as a necessity, like the very tools you made for them. They'd bring you a rusted nail or a broken blade, explain what needed fixing in a few curt words, and leave as quickly as they came. There were no thank yous, no recognition of the skill involved in shaping raw iron into something useful. You were a means to an end. A fixer, not a person. Someone who made life easier for everyone else while their lives carried on. Even during wars, when demand surged and blacksmiths became indispensable for outfitting troops, the praise didn't come back to you. What the soldiers remembered were their victories or defeats. No one lingered on the forge, nor the hours spent hammering out weapons to arm their fight. Essential but unacknowledged was the theme of your life, a paradox you couldn't escape even in the busiest times. And when peace returned, those orders dwindled back into the trickle of everyday village needs, leaving you scrambling to earn enough to survive. The sheer breadth of what you produced should have been enough to make anyone pause in appreciation. It wasn't just swords and axes. It wasn't only the tools that tilled the soil or built homes. Blacksmiths made the very bones of medieval civilization. The hinges that swung the church doors open for Sunday Mass. The nails that stitched together roofs so that families could stay dry when the rains came. The pots that hung over hearth fires, cooking the day's meals. Without blacksmiths, entire villages couldn't function. But the moment your work left the forge, it blended into the fabric of daily life, quietly doing its job without claiming attention. It's easy to overlook the historical weight of blacksmithing when most people focus on knights, kings, and castles. But dig a little deeper, and it's the blacksmiths who built the very tools that supported those seemingly grander stories. Those battles we talk about in school, crests on shields, cavalry thundering into the fray, walls standing strong against invaders. All of them relied on the forge. Sometimes that support came in obvious ways, like providing weapons and armor, but other times it was quieter. Siege engines needed bolts and nails, drawbridges depended on sturdy iron chains, and castle gates couldn't hold their enemies at bay without reinforced hinges. Even in times of peace, the blacksmith was a constant problem solver. A plough too fragile to cut properly through rocky soil. You had to figure out how to shape it stronger. That new set of tongs the carpenter wanted. They needed to balance precision with durability. In a world where most people relied on inherited tools, sometimes decades old, you developed creative ways to extend their life, forging new edges or welding cracks so the tools could last just a little longer. The forge wasn't just a place to make things. It was where ingenuity collided with necessity, the birthplace of problem solving. Whether you were improving durability or devising entirely new methods, your work drove medieval technological progress in ways no one outside the forge ever really understood. But even if they didn't understand, your impact was undeniable. Farmers could till their fields, Villagers could protect their homes. Builders could create spaces for trade, worship, and shelter. A single nail hammered into place by hands like yours could be the difference between a family staying warm in winter or watching their roof leak under a snowy sky. Imagine the sheer weight of it, knowing that civilization didn't just stand on laws or leaders, but on the silent, sturdy work of blacksmiths, people who fought wars with rust and iron instead of swords. For all the sweat and skill this job demanded, though, you knew the rewards weren't waiting for you in the stories or songs. Names of knights and kings filled the scrolls and tavern ballads. Your name, if mentioned at all, was attached to a finished piece, not a legacy. No one walked into your forge thinking about the countless apprenticeships that had passed down this craft, how every technique you used was born out of centuries of trial and error. They just wanted their tool fixed. It wasn't personal, it was practical. And yet, as unnoticed as they were, blacksmiths left behind a legacy as undeniable as the steel they shaped. Every nail hammered into wood and every horseshoe bent to hold its form carried a piece of you, your hands, your labor, your mastery. Over the years, the tools you made scattered beyond the village borders, from blades carried into battle to plows that broke soil in towns you'd never see. And while no one would remember the soot-covered face or the calloused fingers that had created them, your work endured, holding together the invisible framework of medieval life. Blacksmiths didn't just shape metal. They shaped history itself, often unknowingly and almost always without recognition. They were innovators, creating solutions with fire and hammer when the world handed them challenges. They were survivalists, working through brutal conditions to supply their communities with everything they needed to survive. Above all, they were builders, not just of weapons and tools, but of the structure and stability needed for villages, kingdoms, and empires to rise. Think about that the next time you walk by a nail or run your fingers over an old horseshoe hung up for luck. Civilization didn't come from nowhere. It was forged, one clang of the hammer at a time. And the people at the heart of that process left a legacy that stretched far beyond their forges, reminding us how something as simple as metal can shape an entire world. The life of the medieval blacksmith was a quiet testament to endurance. Every ache, every burn, every labored breath forged more than just tools. It forged resilience. Their work wasn't glamorous, but it was vital, providing the tread of horseshoes, the strength of plows, and the bite of swords. Civilization grew one nail at a time, shaped by soot-covered hands that the world rarely noticed. Even when their contributions were overlooked, their craft endured, reminding us of a simple truth. The smallest, most thankless roles can shape history. So maybe consider this. What legacy could your own quiet efforts leave behind?